Lawrence Taylor made around $50 million during his legendary NFL career, but today, reports put his fortune at just a fraction of that. After years of drug problems, legal trouble, and financial losses, his life looks completely different. So what happened to Lawrence Taylor? Here's where we find Lawrence Taylor today. In July of 2024, he turned himself in at a jail in Broward County, Florida. Not for drugs this time, not for a bar fight. He was booked because he failed to update his address on Florida's sex offender registry, a third-degree felony charge that he pleaded not guilty to. And here's the part that stings. It wasn't even the first time. Court records show he'd already been cited for the same violation back in 2021, and again in 2022, when his attorney blamed marital problems for him staying at a hotel he never reported. Let that sink in for a second. A man who once had $50 million pass through his hands is now dealing with paperwork violations tied to a registry he has to check into for the rest of his life. That's not a coincidence of bad luck. That's the tail end of a much longer story. Rewind to July 31st, 2025. Lawrence Taylor is standing in the Roosevelt Room of the White House. President Trump is signing an executive order to relaunch the presidential fitness test and reboot the President's Council on Sports, Fitness, and Nutrition. Taylor is standing just feet away from the podium. Trump hands him the microphone. The optics look like a celebration. An NFL legend, a Hall of Famer, brought back into the fold to inspire kids to get active. Except Taylor is a registered sex offender. He pleaded guilty back in 2011 to sexual misconduct and patronizing a prostitute after paying for sex with a trafficked 16-year-old girl, a case we'll get into in full later. He claimed he thought she was 19. He was sentenced to 6 years probation and ordered to register, a status that's followed him into rooms he probably never expected to stand in again. Fact checkers at Snopes confirmed the man photographed next to the president that day is the same Taylor listed in Florida's sexual offender predator system. So there he was at 66 years old, holding a microphone in the White House, carrying a legal status that most people would spend their whole lives trying to hide from public view. That's the man now. Not the linebacker chasing quarterbacks. Not the guy hoisting a Lombardi trophy. A 66-year-old registered sex offender who still gets invited to rooms of power because of what he did 30, 40 years ago on a football field, and who still can't seem to stay off the wrong side of a courtroom. And it's not just the legal trouble, his body's been failing him too. Reports surfaced that Taylor was hospitalized and treated for pancreatitis, a condition that can be triggered or worsened by decades of heavy drinking and drug use. His attorney, Mark Eglersh, said Taylor was deeply grateful to the entire medical staff for their exceptional care, and thanked fans for the outpouring of prayers during what was described as a genuinely difficult stretch. He got released. He's still walking around. But the toll of everything, the drugs, the stress, the decades of hard living, that's visible in his body now, not just his bank account. So here's the picture: $50 million earned, $200,000 left according to most current estimates. A White House appearance overshadowed by a sex offender registry, a hospital stay for a condition tied to substance abuse, repeated arrests for failing to follow the terms of his own legal sentence. This is Lawrence Taylor's life right now, in his mid-60s, decades removed from the last time he played a football game. To understand how a man goes from being the highest paid defensive player of his era to this, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to when the money started rolling in. Back before anyone knew just how much of it would disappear. Because the fall didn't start with the White House appearance, or the hospital bed, or even the sex offender charge. It started much earlier, with a habit that took hold of him before he'd even finished his rookie season, and with business decisions that would gut a fortune that should have lasted him the rest of his life. Taylor's story isn't just about one bad year or one scandal. It's a slow bleed that lasted decades, money leaking out through drug binges, failed business ventures, tax problems, divorce, and legal fees, one after another, compounding until there was almost nothing left. To really get it, we need to start at the top. The contracts, the deals, and the fortune he actually built before any of it started coming apart. Before any of the wreckage, there was real money, serious money for the era. Lawrence Taylor entered the NFL in 1981 as the second overall pick out of the University of North Carolina, and he didn't take long to prove he was worth every cent. He won Defensive Rookie of the Year and NFL Defensive Player of the Year in the same season. The only rookie in league history to pull that off. That's not hype, that's just what happened. Before he'd even played a full season with the Giants, Donald Trump tried to lure him away. Trump offered Taylor a $1 million loan to jump to the USFL's New Jersey Generals. Taylor took the money, then changed his mind and stayed with the Giants, eventually paying Trump back and signing a 6-year, $6.2 million deal with New York instead. In 1990, he'd sign again, this time a 3-year, $5 million contract. For a linebacker in that era, those numbers were enormous. He was, for most of his career, the highest-paid defensive player in the league. Over 13 seasons, all with the Giants, Taylor racked up numbers that still get discussed today. More than 1,000 tackles, over 140 career sacks, 9 interceptions, 33 forced fumbles. He won the NFL MVP award in 1986, a nearly unheard-of honor for a defensive player, after piling up over 20 sacks that season. He helped the Giants win 2 Super Bowls, in 1987 and again in 1991. John Madden once said Taylor changed the way defense itself was played, how pass rushing worked, how linebackers moved, how offenses had to block against him. He wasn't just good, he rewired the position. All of that dominance came with a paycheck to match. And when you tally up his salary across those 13 seasons plus endorsement money, the number that gets repeated everywhere from financial writers to sports outlets is $50 million. That's his career earnings, adjusted for what it actually meant at the time. This was money made in the 80s and early 90s, when $50 million went a whole lot further than it does today. In today's dollars, that fortune would be worth multiples of what it sounds like on paper. And Taylor didn't stop at football checks. He leaned into endorsements, cashing in on being one of the most feared and recognizable athletes of his generation. He had a partnership with Nike and other companies that wanted his face and his name attached to their products. He was a star who transcended football, a guy casual fans who'd never watched a full Giants game still recognized by name. After retirement, he kept the machine running in other ways. He picked up television work as an analyst on TNT. He moved into acting, landing small roles and cameos in films like Any Given Sunday and The Waterboy. He did voice work too, playing a character in the 2002 video game Grand Theft Auto, Vice City, and later voicing a role in the football video game series Blitz, The League. He even got a memorable cameo in HBO's The Sopranos, playing cards in a mob card game scene that fans still talk about. This was a guy who understood he had a brand and who worked that brand across multiple industries at once. On paper, none of this looks like the resume of a man who'd eventually end up with a few $100,000 to his name. This looks like a guy who built layered income streams, playing contracts, endorsement deals, TV work, acting gigs, voice acting, the kind of diversified portfolio that financial advisors tell athletes to aim for after their playing days end. But there was a problem underneath all of it, one that had already taken root before Taylor had even finished his rookie season. It's the same problem that shows up again and again throughout the rest of this story, quietly eating away at every dollar he made, no matter how many new income streams he opened up. It started with a party. It started with cocaine. According to multiple accounts of his career, Taylor first tried cocaine in 1981, his rookie season, the same year he was winning Defensive Rookie of the Year and Defensive Player of the Year. By his 3rd season in the league, he developed a serious habit. He got caught for the first time in a 1987 drug test, though by his own admission, he'd been beating the system before that by using his teammates' urine samples to pass off as his own. He failed another test in 1988 and was suspended 30 days. So even as the Nike deals rolled in, even as he signed multi-million-dollar contracts, even as he stacked up MVP votes and Super Bowl rings, there was a second Lawrence Taylor developing in parallel, one who was already spending heavily on drugs, one whose habit would eventually consume the very fortune the football version of him was building. The rise and the unraveling weren't sequential. They were happening at the same time for years, hidden from the public behind the highlight reels and the championship parades. That's the part that makes this story different from a simple athlete blew his money tale. Taylor wasn't just bad with contracts or duped by a shady investment guy, though that happened too, and we'll get to it. He was fighting an addiction that started at the absolute peak of his success and never fully let go, one that would define the next 3 decades of his life more than any football statistic ever could. To understand exactly how deep that addiction went and how much of the $50 million it actually swallowed, we have to go inside it, not the surface level he struggled with drugs version everybody already knows. The real version, the one Taylor himself eventually admitted to, in interviews, in a book, and in a court record that reads like something out of a crime drama. By his own account years later, Taylor said the drugs never slowed him down on the field. He told 60 Minutes that sometimes he'd be standing in the huddle, and instead of thinking about the defensive play that had just been called, he'd be thinking about smoking crack after the game was over. That's not a guy dabbling. That's a guy whose addiction had fully embedded itself into his daily life, game days included. By his third NFL season, multiple accounts describe him smoking an ounce of crack a day. To dodge the league's drug testing, he swapped urine samples with teammates who he knew would test clean, a scheme he later admitted to in his own autobiography, LT Living on the Edge. He checked himself into rehab for the first time in February of 1986. While he was still an active player, still putting up numbers that made him look untouchable to everyone watching from the outside. The habit didn't stay confined to game days or off seasons. In one interview, Taylor described his own home during the worst of it in blunt terms, saying it had gotten so bad his place was almost like a crack house, though not one where anything was sold. He said he didn't want to know anyone who wasn't an addict, a dealer, or a hooker. His agent at the time, Mark Lepselter, walked into that house and couldn't process what he was seeing, describing it as a suburban crack den, dank and desolate, with holes in the couches and a pool that had turned into something unrecognizable. Taylor admitted he was spending around $1,000 a day on escort services and cocaine during the peak of his using. He called it, in his own words, a hell of an expensive party, one that, in his telling, never really ended. White sheets covered his windows. He turned down autograph shows and endorsement deals, the exact kind of income streams that could have kept his post-football finances stable, because the drugs came first. Retirement didn't slow any of it down. If anything, it removed the last guardrails. Taylor has said that the day after his final NFL game, he immediately went and smoked crack. No transition period, no cooling off phase, just straight back into the habit that had shadowed his entire playing career. In 1996, he was arrested, trying to buy crack from an undercover police officer, and was sentenced to 60 hours of community service. That wasn't an isolated slip. 2 years before that, he'd already been arrested in Myrtle Beach for trying to buy what turned out to be fake crack cocaine from another undercover officer. Then came 1997 and 1998. 2 more arrests tied to buying crack, back to back, close enough together that they finally pushed him toward a second stint in rehab. His lawyer at the time told reporters Taylor had said goodbye to people close to him and expected to be in the clinic for 30 to 60 days. The same lawyer called it a positive sign, noting that anytime an addict gets positive reinforcement, it matters. But by that point, the pattern was already well established. Rehab, relapse, arrest, rehab again. Taylor has talked about his relationship with sobriety in a way that's more honest than most people, in his position, ever get. In one interview, years into a stretch of being clean, he said he doesn't look at it like he's beaten it for good, that every single day is still a struggle, and he doesn't assume he won't go back to it. That's not the language of a man who's declared victory. That's the language of someone who understands exactly how close the edge still is, even years later. And this is where the money story and the addiction story become the same story. Every dollar spent on escorts and cocaine during those binges wasn't just morally or personally costly. It was literally draining a fortune that had already been earned and banked. $1,000 a day, sustained over months and years, adds up into millions before anyone even gets to the business failures or the legal bills. The drug habit wasn't a side chapter in Taylor's financial collapse. It was one of the primary engines of it, running quietly underneath every other bad decision he made. Because there were other bad decisions too. Big ones, expensive ones, the kind that would have hurt his finances, even if the drug habit hadn't existed at all. Taylor didn't just spend his fortune away one binge at a time. He also lost enormous chunks of it in business ventures that promised to multiply his wealth, and instead evaporated it. And in legal and tax troubles that piled on fines and penalties at the exact moments he could least afford them. To understand how a $50 million fortune actually hits zero, you have to follow the money through those failures too. And that's a story that runs through boardrooms and courtrooms just as much as it runs through crack houses. If the drugs were the slow leak, the business ventures were the sudden ruptures, and the biggest one had a name: All Pro Products. Taylor started the company after his playing days, and for a brief moment, it looked like it might actually be the smart post-career pivot financial advisors always tell athletes to make. The company went public at $5 a share and tripled in value within its first month on the market. At its peak, Taylor's personal stake in the business was reportedly worth over $10 million. Some accounts put the peak valuation of his stake even higher, north of $100 million at the company's absolute high point before the crash. Either way, this wasn't pocket change. This was a real fortune sitting on paper, tied to a company with his name and reputation behind it. Then it collapsed. The company ceased production not long after that peak, and Taylor's stake went from a life-changing sum to essentially worthless. He personally lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in the wreckage, on top of the paper fortune that vanished entirely. This is the classic athlete investment trap. Fame and name recognition used to launch a business that doesn't have the operational backbone to survive, and a retired player left holding stock that's worth nothing once the hype fades. Around the same period, the IRS came knocking. Taylor pleaded guilty to a federal charge of filing a false income tax return after failing to report $48,000 in income from a restaurant he'd owned near Giants Stadium that had since closed. It's a relatively modest number compared to the scale of his other losses, but it mattered. A federal tax fraud conviction doesn't just cost money in fines, it costs credibility, and it adds a permanent mark to a financial record that was already deteriorating fast. All of this converged in 1998. Around the same time Taylor entered rehab for his crack addiction. He also filed for personal Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The court documents from that filing painted a stark picture. He was a year behind on mortgage payments for a home valued at just over $600,000. Think about that contrast. A man who'd earned tens of millions of dollars playing football, who once had a company stake worth more than $10 million on paper, was now behind on payments for a house that, relative to his career earnings, should have been pocket change. The bankruptcy filing wasn't the end of the financial trouble. It was really just the moment it became public and official. Taylor had, by that point, already blown through most of his fortune. The debts listed in his bankruptcy weren't complicated corporate obligations or investor lawsuits. They were the mortgage, some smaller bills, the kind of debt that piles up when income dries up and spending habits don't change to match. And it happened again. In 2009, more than a decade after his first bankruptcy filing, Taylor filed for bankruptcy a second time, this time specifically to stop a home from going into foreclosure. Two separate bankruptcy filings, more than 10 years apart, both connected to real estate he couldn't afford to keep. That's not a single bad year. That's a pattern that stretched across 2 full decades of his post-football life, each filing a fresh signal that the fortune wasn't coming back, no matter how many TV appearances or acting cameos he picked up in between. By the time financial trackers started putting numbers on his current net worth, the figures were almost impossible to reconcile with what he'd once earned. Estimates online have varied wildly over the years, some sites floating figures as low as $100,000, others suggesting numbers in the low millions, depending on how you count real estate or ongoing appearance fees. But the most consistently cited figure from outlets that track celebrity finances closely puts his current net worth at around $200,000. Compare that to the highest paid outside linebackers active in the league today, who make more than $20 million a year in a single season. And the scale of what Taylor lost becomes almost impossible to fully picture. Here's what's important to understand about this collapse. It wasn't one bad decision. It was a compounding cycle. The drug habit drained cash reserves. The business failure wiped out what should have been a safety net. The tax fraud added fines and legal fees on top of an already shrinking pile. Each bankruptcy filing came with its own costs: legal fees, credit damage, the inability to easily borrow or refinance afterward. Every part of the collapse fed the next part. By the time the second bankruptcy hit in 2009, Taylor wasn't dealing with the fallout of one bad year in the 90s anymore. He was dealing with 2 decades of accumulated damage, all stacked on top of each other, with almost no fortune left to absorb any more shocks. And unfortunately for Taylor, the shocks weren't finished, because running parallel to the drug spirals and the business collapses and the bankruptcy filings was a legal saga that would end up defining his public reputation more than any statistic from his playing days. One that started with a single night in 2010, and that has continued to follow him, court date after court date, all the way into the last couple of years of his life. In 2010, Taylor was arrested in Rockland County, New York, on charges including third-degree rape, patronizing a prostitute, sexual abuse, and endangering the welfare of a child. He'd paid for sex with a woman who turned out to be a 16-year-old runaway from the Bronx, trafficked by a pimp who was later prosecuted federally. In court, Taylor said the girl had told him she was 19, and that he only learned later she was actually 16 and legally unable to consent. He admitted he'd paid her $300. He resisted a plea deal for months, initially pleading not guilty to the more serious charges. Eventually, in March of 2011, he accepted a deal, pleading guilty to 2 misdemeanor charges: sexual misconduct and patronizing a prostitute. Prosecutors said the reduced charges were acceptable partly because Taylor had cooperated with human trafficking investigations after his arrest, reportedly assisting a federal case against the man accused of trafficking the teenager. His former Giants teammate Harry Carson showed up to court that day and gave him a supportive handshake when he arrived. The sentence: 6 years of probation and a mandatory registration as a sex offender for the rest of his life. That single legal outcome has followed Taylor longer and more persistently than almost anything else in this story. Longer than the bankruptcies, longer than most of the drug arrests, because a sex offender registration doesn't expire quietly. It requires constant compliance. Every address change, every move, every detail has to be reported indefinitely. And Taylor has struggled with exactly that requirement repeatedly for over a decade. In 2021, he was cited for failing to report an address change, an incident he attributed to the chaos of a personal separation. In 2022, it happened again. His attorney explained that he'd been staying at a hotel due to marital problems and hadn't registered that address, believing, incorrectly, that it didn't count as a change of residence. He corrected the issue that time without major consequence. But in July of 2024, it escalated. This time, Florida charged him with a third-degree felony, a significant jump from the misdemeanor-level citations of prior years. He turned himself in at the Broward County Jail and was released without having to post bail, but the charge itself represented the second time he'd faced this exact kind of violation, and prosecutors were clearly done treating it as a minor administrative slip. Under Florida's ranking system, sex offenders are classified from level 1, the lowest risk of reoffending, up to level 3, the highest. Reports on Taylor's case note that while he was no longer under any court supervision or probation in Florida by 2024, he remained legally required to register indefinitely under state law. That's the reality of a sex offender designation. Probation eventually ends, but the registration obligation and the public record attached to it does not. Which brings the story full circle to that Roosevelt Room appearance in 2025. Taylor, invited by a longtime friend and supporter in Donald Trump, stood at the White House as part of a ceremony meant to promote youth fitness and athletic achievement, represented in that moment as exactly the kind of legendary athlete kids should look up to. Trump handed him the microphone. Taylor, by most accounts, seemed proud of the invitation, even if he expressed some uncertainty about the specifics of his new role on the council. Fact-checking outlets moved quickly to confirm what many people watching already suspected, that the man in that room was the same Lawrence Julius Taylor listed in Florida's sex offender database, the same man convicted in 2011 for what happened with a trafficked teenager. That contrast is really the entire arc of this story compressed into a single afternoon. A Hall of Fame athlete celebrated on a national stage for his contributions to sports, an inspiration for young people standing there while a permanent legal record follows him into that very room, a record tied directly to the same pattern of consequences that had already cost him money, freedom, and reputation for over a decade. And through all of it, the health toll has kept accumulating too. The pancreatitis hospitalization is just the latest visible sign that decades of hard living leave a mark that outlasts the headlines. Taylor's attorney described him as deeply grateful for the medical care and the outpouring of support during that stretch. But the underlying message was clear enough. This is a body that's paid a price for everything that came before it, the same way his bank account did. So where does that leave things now? Taylor is in his mid-60s. He's still occasionally in the public eye. A White House appearance here, a hospital release there, an old teammate's tribute, a Hall of Fame anniversary mention. But the fortune is gone. The legal shadow hasn't lifted. The addiction, by his own admission, is something he still treats as an ongoing fight, rather than a battle he's permanently won. 2 Super Bowl rings sit somewhere in his possession as proof of what he built. A sex offender registration and a net worth that barely registers against his old paychecks sit right alongside them, as proof of what it cost him to lose it all. $50 million came in over 13 seasons of chasing quarterbacks and terrorizing offenses. It went out through crack houses, failed companies, unpaid taxes, foreclosed mortgages, courtrooms, and probation offices, $1 and one bad decision at a time, for more than 30 years, right up until today.